This program is brought to you by realestate.com.au. Keep moving with Australia's #1 address in property.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at this weekend's auction numbers. Nationally, there were 1,747 auctions with a clearance rate of about 56%. Now, numbers were a bit lower than usual due to the long weekend holiday in most states. Sydney held 497 auctions with a clearance rate of about 53%. There were also roughly 1,600 private sales in New South Wales. Melbourne held 779 auctions with a clearance rate of about 61%. Victoria also reported roughly 1,250 private sales. Brisbane held 82 auctions. The clearance rate was about 57%, and there were roughly 1,044 private sales across the state of Queensland. Adelaide held 79 auctions. The clearance rate was about 70% in Adelaide. There were 215 private sales. The ACT held 35 auctions with a clearance rate of 60%. There were also 90 private sales. And Perth only held 2 auctions, but there were 573 private sales across Western Australia. Well, for more on property, I'm joined now by Flaherty from REA Group. And let's just kick this off with the slightly lower auction clearance rates, but really it's due to the public holiday across quite a lot of Australia, right?
That's definitely the case, and you could see from the figures there just weren't as many auctions over the weekend as we typically see, especially when we hit that spring season. Melbourne and Sydney both lower auction levels, and actually the Melbourne clearance rate was relatively low compared to what we would normally see.
Yeah, how much stock, though, is there on the market at the moment? Is that one of the reasons why there's a lot of the clearance rates are falling, because there's just so much choice for buyers?
In the case of Melbourne, I definitely think that is the case. There is just so many properties out there for sale at the moment. We know that that trend of investors selling off in Melbourne is absolutely continuing this spring. And what we're seeing is that those properties, because there are more and more coming online, they're taking longer to sell. So I think actually there's a lot of opportunity for buyers out there in Melbourne at the moment, but I guess more challenging selling conditions for vendors.
Yeah, it feels like it's really turning into a buyer's market. Obviously, Melbourne, there was the grand final weekend a couple of weeks ago. Now we've got the public holidays across quite a few states this weekend. But how much stock are you expecting to come onto the market for sale in the coming weeks ahead?
Look, we will see selling levels pick up, as in more properties being listed for sale. We're already starting to see those hit the website. The second half of spring is typically one of the busiest times of the year, and we expect to see that in Melbourne. It's absolutely turning into a buyer's market. I think arguably it has been that way in Melbourne for some time. We have seen property prices dip. Of course, in the other states, we're really not seeing that trend. We're seeing properties sell very rapidly in markets like Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane. So there's a lot of variation depending on where you look in the country.
Yeah, you mentioned Perth. I mean, why is the Perth market just so strong compared to the rest of the country?
Look, we have seen investor activity in Perth absolutely surge. We're seeing in a lot of suburbs in Greater Perth, the median time it takes to sell a home is now less than 10 days. So this is quite extraordinary, and one of the reasons for this is that buyer demand is just far exceeding the number of homes for sale, particularly with a lot of investors looking to get into that Perth market at the moment.
The Bureau of Statistics last week put out its lending indicators numbers. I think roughly $30 billion in loans were written in the month of August. It seems to be rising, and is part of that investors now coming back into the market?
Definitely. So across the board, we have seen the number of new loan commitments increase for all the different buyer types, but it's really property investors that have seen the strongest year-on-year growth. So across the country, up about 20%. But there are some markets where we're seeing much higher share rise in investor activity, and Perth is definitely one of those. Brisbane is absolutely one of those, and so is Adelaide.
Yeah, when you look at those lending numbers, I mean, is there anything state by state that really jumps out at you?
Well, I just think the contrast we're seeing is absolutely extraordinary at the moment. If we look at property prices, we've got them coming down in Melbourne and Hobart, but then if we look in the rest of the country, property prices are rising. And then if we look at investor activity, in Melbourne it's only up 5% over the year. but in some of the other markets around the country, it's up by over 30% year on year. So it's really fascinating to see. In Sydney, up about 20%. So, you know, broadly speaking, we have seen investors really come back into the market this year. But of course, it's not the case everywhere, particularly in Melbourne and Tasmania.
All right, we're almost at the end of the year. I mean, what sort of price growth are you expecting in 2025?
It's a good question. And again, it comes down to the market that you're looking in. If we look at just how much property prices have moved over just the last 3 months, around 60% of suburbs in the country have seen property prices up. Again, it varies a lot by market. So in Queensland, in Western Australia, in South Australia, almost all suburbs have seen property prices up over the past 3 months. If we look at markets like Melbourne and Tasmania again, around 20% of suburbs have seen rises. So we're still seeing prices decrease in most areas in those markets.
And Flaherty, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.